Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Lots of nods. Excellent. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first on the Energy and Tech stage. I am Joshua Neal. I'm Intelligence Editor with ED, a sustainability media company. And this panel today is going to be on deploying innovative technology for the energy transition. Before I introduce the speakers and get into our questions, I can give you a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. And while our speakers are having some headset problems. So, as you all know, the energy transition, as we shift from fossil fuels toward cleaner, sustainable energy, is an imminent challenge that's facing, I'm sure, a lot of people here. It's a challenge that affects not only individual sustainability teams, but whole organizations and a whole range of teams within them. Decarbonizing our energy systems means not only building more renewables, but integrating them intelligently into the systems we already have. That means making grids smarter, infrastructure more resilient, and consumption more efficient. And while we need to accelerate this change, we must also ensure that that change is inclusive and just and aligned not only with climate goals, but with human development as well. As such, we need innovation in this space critically. From next-generation batteries, virtual power plants, to AI-driven energy management, we're seeing a wave of disruptive solutions that are hopefully going to revolutionize this space and bring that transition forward. But of course, innovation isn't enough on its own. We're going to need, we will face a number of subsidiary challenges, from deployment at scale to regulatory hurdles, and they all need to be overcome for the transition to move on apace. Today, we have a panel of experts who have all the answers. They will be providing them for you. If we would like to go down this row and introduce yourselves very quickly before we get on to our first question.
Thank you. I'm Olivia Powis. I'm Chief Exec of the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. We are the leading European trade association representing over 120 members, and we promote the commercial deployment of carbon capture and storage.
Thank you. Matthew Bilson. I'm Director of Policy and Market Strategy at Piclo, and Piclo is a bit like eBay. So we're a marketplace that matches buyers and sellers of something called flexibility. So flexibility is all about using more or less electricity at different times and being rewarded for doing that. So we help people do that.
Okay, hello, I'm Emily Nurse. I'm Head of Net Zero at the Climate Change Committee. The Climate Change Committee, we are independent advisors to the UK government on climate targets. We provide advice on climate targets. For example, we provide advice on the net zero target. And we also assess progress every year towards meeting those targets. And actually today we put out a report, our annual progress report to UK government, and our CEO will be doing a keynote on that, I think at 12:10. So definitely come and watch that.
I'm Rowan Edwards. I work in the Business Applications and Space Solutions team at the European Space Agency. We provide funding and guidance to companies that want to use more space data in products and services.
Finally, I'm Tom Crawford. I'm Group Head of Sustainability at Vodafone. Vodafone's a big global telecommunications company covering about 275 million customers, 50 million fintech users, as much as many businesses, governments, service providers. We're over 15 countries in Europe and Africa, 40 globally. The purpose is very much to connect everyone for a better future, but whilst also doing so responsibly and achieving our target of net zero for 24 over our entire value chain. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got now about 45 minutes today, 45 minutes today, to run through a few questions around innovation in the energy transition, and then we'll try and move on, if we have time, to Q&A with the audience. We have a lot to get through, so we'll try and keep the time and get those questions in at the end. But if we move on to our first question to start with then, obviously this is all about innovative technology within this space. Would you all like to begin by introducing and discussing what, to you, are the most important energy innovations and innovative technology we're seeing today and that have the potential to disrupt the current system? You've lost hearing.
I've just...
Okay, oh, we're back. Okay. Did everyone get the question? No? Okay, I will redo that. Sorry about that.
I think we did.
We did? I had a few shakes. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. If we'd like to go down and talk through your your thoughts.
Yes, I mean, with regards to carbon capture and storage, I think the important point to make at the beginning is this is not a new technology. This is a technology that's been deployed globally for over 20 years. In Norway, they've been successfully capturing and storing CO2 for almost 30 years. But what is new is doing it in the UK and also doing it at the scale that that we need to do it to be able to decarbonise our industries. And carbon capture and storage is the only real route to decarbonising some of our hard-to-abate industries. So for the cement industry, chemicals industry, energy from waste industries, for example, they're all industries that that provide essential products that we need on a day-to-day basis and will continue to need until we can transition and find low-carbon alternatives. So that's going to take a long time.
The Sheffield Hubs will begin shortly. James Brugenay will be unlocking the power of global entertainment on the Business and Supply Chain Hub, while Louis Stevens and Caroline Bates will be discussing on purpose to proof on the Food Systems Hub. Thank you.
And so we very much need to get on and actually deploy this industry. It's also really important as well that for those industries such as aviation that are going to find it very difficult to get to net zero themselves, that there are removal technologies, and these are removal technologies such as bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, and direct air capture with storage, where we can remove CO2 from the atmosphere permanently, and those can then be used to offset against industries such as aviation that are going to continue to be emitting more CO2 than they're able to reduce. So these are really critical technologies. We need to deploy them at scale. We've got some great targets from the Climate Change Committee in terms of where we need to get to. And we have made a good start in the UK. We've just taken final investment decisions on the first projects, but we really have got a long way to do in terms of deploying them at the scale that we need to get to net zero.
So perhaps a different perspective, so rather talking about big individual power stations, I'll talk about an announcement Octopus made on Monday, I think it was, where they announced this thing of if you buy an electric vehicle through them, you get free charging for the car. The reason this is exciting is not so much the free car or free electricity with the electric vehicle, but what they're doing and why they're doing it. So really what they're doing is they're trying to create a virtual power plant. So using all these fairly little electric vehicles as a power station, which then Octopus can charge or even take electricity from the battery and inject it back into the grid. So this idea of a virtual power station, you can also call it distributed energy. That's what I think is really exciting. It's about how we're going to use some of these new technologies in a much cleverer way. And Octopus is not the only company doing it. There's lots of other smaller companies, very innovative companies who are already doing some of this. And including not just the residential sector, but also the industrial sector, which sometimes gets forgotten. So Octopus gets all the headline for good reasons, but there's lots of other companies doing the same thing, and it's this principle of using software to unlock the potential of hardware.
Fantastic. Emily?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go a bit broader. I'm not the type of person that's good at picking one thing. I can never pick my favourite film, for example. But I think for me, what we're going to see going forward is a real widespread and rapid adoption of electric technologies across the board, and that they'll be replacing older fossil fuel technologies, and that's what I think is really going to disrupt the system. So we obviously already use electricity. We've been using electricity since the 19th century. We currently use it for mostly lighting appliances, machinery, etc. So what's going to change is we're going to also move from using petrol and diesel in transport to electrifying, and gas and oil in boilers to heat, and also in industrial heat. So not everything can be solved with electricity, but a big chunk of our energy demand can come from clean electricity. Some of these technologies are not new. We've got for example, electric vehicles in Norway have really taken over. Electric heat pumps are really mainstream in a lot of European countries. We're really quite behind in the UK. We do need to improve them going forwards, but some of the electric technologies are newer. Some of the industrial processes, electric steam crackers, for example, for chemical production. So there are some innovations that are needed in them. We put out our advice on the UK's next legally binding target, the 7th carbon budget, which is a legally binding cap for the 5-year periods from 2038 to 2042. We put that advice out in February. In that advice, we showed how the UK can decarbonise and get to net zero emissions by 2050. 60% of the emissions reductions required to meet that target come from electrification across the economy, electrifying key technologies and decarbonising and expanding electricity supply. There is an important role for other technologies. Olivia has already mentioned carbon capture and storage, which is key in some industrial processes for offsetting emissions in hard to abate sectors such as aviation and low carbon fuels, etc. But we know we need to do a lot of electrification. We're moving away from a fossil fuel era, away from polluting energy system that's really wasteful. When you burn fossil fuels, you feel all the heat coming off them. And electric technologies, they're much more efficient. And in our analysis, we showed that whilst electricity demand more than doubled by 2050, total demand fell and the amount of wasted energy was cut in half. So it's a better system and it's more energy secure, but energy costs will be less volatile and less dependent on global events. So I think that's what's going to disrupt the system, and it will require a real rapid build out in infrastructure. But we have done this before. We doubled electricity demand in the 1950s. We did it again in the 1960s. And so we need to do that again whilst also shifting to renewables. And I guess what I wanted to say is that innovations in this space are plentiful, and I'm sure we've already mentioned some. We'll be talking some more. Electric technologies are very efficient, but they can be made more efficient, and we can benefit from their cheaper running costs even more with innovation. And I think really key is we need to get smarter about how we use electricity and how we match supply and demand, both in terms of time and space, and that can really improve this system of lower cost running technologies if we can really maximise that and have even less wasted energy. So I'd say the electric era has begun, so let's continue to innovate and reap all the benefits.
Fantastic, yeah, Ro.
I'm going to come back to the software enabling hardware part of that, but also the better use of what we have and linking up with the systems. As much as I don't want to put it front and center, AI is a bit of a game changer and an enabler, and it allows a level of analytics to actually link up these systems, which we haven't had before, where you can have on-the-fly analysis of the amount of electricity that a solar farm is collecting, or predictive analytics of what there's going to be in coming weeks, or with a wind farm. And then you can link this up with smart battery technology, smart grids, and you can make much better use of this energy that's being created and get it to where it needs to be at the right times. We had a recent call on integrated digital solutions for the energy sector, and we got a lot of great proposals as part of that involved aspects of this, which were linking up these different systems, whether it was solar in remote areas or predictions for hydropower generation. And I think there's only going to be more of that in time in future.
Fantastic.
Okay, so going last. Overlaps with all of these conversations. So the context for Vodafone is a lot of our base stations, all of the towers that support all of the communications, they draw a lot of energy. They're often in very rural locations that aren't connected to grids. So that's a big area of focus for us. And in that context, I would say there are three kind of really core areas of the innovation that I see. One is localized generation, it's storage, and then it's reducing demand through software and through AI. So in terms of localized generation, we're experimenting, we're looking to we're piloting, we're experimenting with lots of different solutions there, from micro turbines, obviously, to solar. I think solar is actually, obviously, we've seen a huge innovation in solar over the years, but I think there's an awful lot still to go in that space. Before Vodafone, I was at Dyson, and there we actually gave them a sustainability sort of innovation award, but we gave it to a Filipino engineer called Kavi, who developed a solar program that actually was a biofilm that created out of food waste that went over the top of the solar panel that then absorbed UV and emitted visible light. And the context there is that actually then it significantly increased the efficacy and efficiency of the panels and energy capture, particularly in cloudy days or in installation aspects that weren't ideal, which is incredible. So I think there's still lots more innovation there. From the capture perspective, hardware and software absolutely agree that from a hardware, if you look at the energy density of batteries, i.e. how much energy they can hold for a given volume, it's increased about tenfold over the last 20 years. We've got solid state batteries hopefully coming on very, very soon. And then the software control of it, so we've at Vodafone applied AI for the software control within our base stations if we have blackouts in the energy grid, base station goes down, it relies on batteries. So through application of AI, we've seen 60% improvement in the battery capacity or life based on sort of low impact usage. And when there's really high impact usage, like there was in Spain recently, in Portugal, we see 100% improvement through the use of AI. And then finally, sensors. I mean, everybody knows, right, building management systems for energy reduction, but even down to, we've worked with Thames Water to roll out smart meter network over thousands of sites, which ultimately leads to better and faster understanding of usage, detection of leakage, and enabling them to stop leakage. Stopping water leakage saves energy because the amount of energy it takes in electricity to actually create the water in the first place.
Fantastic. What struck me there as we were going down is that I would say, apart from maybe AI and potentially innovative adaptations in batteries like solid state and things like that, a lot of what we were talking about was things that have been around for a little while but need scale up or improvement to kind of make a significant change. Would you say then, in that case, that much of what we need to get to the energy transition is already here and just needs improvement? I'll throw that over to you first, since you were kind of talking in a more general sense.
Yeah. So and I'll do it from the perspective of the Climate Change Committee. So we put out a pathway to net zero based on what we think is feasible technologies that have been proven, right? So we'll put out a pathway and we'll say, this is how you decarbonise, and there are some where it really is super clear what the answer is now. Electric vehicles is the answer to decarbonising surface transport. Electrifying how we heat our buildings, that's the answer. And for that, it's just, we have the technologies, they've worked in other countries, we need to scale up. They can improve, they can be more efficient, but what we need is really clear signalling from government that that's where we're going. There are others that are not at scale at that sense, but have been proven. So we talked about carbon capture and storage already, and we know that will be there in the mix. The exact balance of that compared to, so for example, in aviation, there are sustainable aviation fuels out there, and those are being developed, and they can reduce emissions. But as far as we understand today, they can't completely eliminate them. So we have a mix in our pathway of also offsetting emissions with engineered removals using carbon capture and storage. The exact balance there we don't know, so it depends how costs come down as we scale up, and if you do get more innovations in that space, exactly what will happen, and we need to innovate the options. So we leave optionality open in the pathway, but just be clear that we do need to start, 2050 is not that long away, we have targets along the way. These things have they're big infrastructure projects often, which take time to build up. So we need sort of clarity and certainty that these things are going to build up, even if we don't know the exact scale of everything. And then we also need to keep innovating in other areas. So, for example, taking a completely different example, in the consumption of meat. So if we want to reduce how much meat we eat, one of the ways to do that is to make alternatives that taste really good and are cheaper. So innovating in that space is really important. And we've already talked about just in general using less of this electricity that we need to produce by innovating to make it cheaper.
Anyone have any further thoughts on that point? Please.
I think there's a bit of a fear of the unknown sometimes with emerging technology, that nobody wants to necessarily be the first adopter of anything. And particularly with space-based data, we get a lot of companies, and spoken to plenty over the years, that say we want to use more, we think we should be using more, but we don't really know what it is or what we should be doing with it. So I think you need early adopters, you need people taking the plunge. This is where I applaud Vodafone for actually launching their own satellite and leading from the front. And I think you just need more of that, people saying, all right, we'll take a chance on this. Maybe we're not going to nail it first time, but it's a step in the right direction and we'll definitely learn something from the experience.
I would agree with that, and I think having that understanding that for first-of-a-kind deployment, or I won't say first-of-a-kind technologies for much of us, because it isn't first-of-a-kind technologies, but it is first-of-a-kind deployment, and allowing that to happen and learning from that. We've seen cost curves come down for solar PV, for offshore wind, but it didn't happen immediately. The first ones were not cheap, and they weren't the most efficient, and they have really evolved over time as technologies scale up. And so I think we have to sort of have a bit more of a culture of understanding that these technologies need time, they need to be deployed at scale, and we will learn. And it is a global for all these technologies that we're talking about. It's not just the UK that's doing it; they're happening globally, and we can learn from what's going on in other countries, but also the UK, particularly for CCUS, but I think probably for all of these, has a massive opportunity. But we've got to keep going and take that plunge, and to be able to get to where we need to, we have to be doing it now.
Yeah, fantastic. I think those all lead on quite well to the next question, which is talking about, the fundamental issues and challenges that we're facing in integrating new technology or scaling up all technology. So my question to you is, how ready are, particularly in the UK, our grids and our infrastructure to integrate, next generation innovations or to scale up ones we currently have? Where are we at with that, and what needs to be done, I guess? Should we start with you, Tom? If you want to throw you in there.
No problem. I mean, we absolutely... We need more renewable energy, right? And we absolutely encourage and celebrate kind of governments who are really leaning into that and trying to push it. I think connecting these last two questions, actually, I think obviously government have a massive part to play here. Indeed, frameworks and policies have a massive part to play. But I think also, as does collaboration, and I think this kind of joining the dots here, but we need the government frameworks as much as we do sort of the financial backing. But I think a lot of existing technologies which are maybe not accelerating as much as they could do, or new startup technologies which is super exciting, what we need fundamentally is space, both from a regulatory framework perspective, but also from sort of business enablers, is to create collaboration between the technology provider, be it, for example, a startup, between big organizations who have the scale to deploy it and to be the first movers and to take the risks, and between the big financing houses. And there's a lot of finance around to be had, and between government and evolving policy. And I think that, for me, is that sort of nexus of where we really need to try and accelerate is within the collaboration, because doing it in isolation is always really hard work. Doing it in collaboration, I think then it becomes much stickier, it lands, and it creates that example for everybody else to follow, to Rowan's point, that once someone leads on it, someone big, with support of those collaborations, then others follow.
I suppose from our viewpoint, it's partly about the electricity grid. So how much and how quickly do you build pylons? And there's definitely a Goldilocks element to it, because really we're going to need more pylons, but you don't want too many, because that's going to be expensive, and you don't want too few or too few pylons, because if you do, you won't be able to connect a heat pump or a large wind farm, kind of the two scales. So I think the positives are the government has introduced actions to increase the speed by which people can connect to the grid, this connections reform. NESO is looking at how to invest more into the infrastructure to build out the more grid. But also the regulator, Ofgem, I think, is increasingly thinking about how to use the grid in a smarter, better way. One of the ways you create more space on the grid, more space on the pylons, is to use electricity at different ways and different times. So rather than just having one big peak, so the stereotype was when everyone switched on in the middle of Coronation Street. That's probably quite a dated stereotype. But this notion of you need to make sure everyone's not using everything all of the time, or when like solar, that all solar generation is peaking at the same time. So how do you shift things around a bit more? But I think the positives are, so far, certainly in the UK, the grid has been very stable, and that we are increasingly able to connect some of these things. But as we say, the future is electric, so how do we make sure we keep pace with some of that? So I think we're doing okay, but there's still more to do.
Can I just, there is also a role, and this is another application of carbon capture and storage with low carbon dispatchable power. So for example, on a gas CCGT turbine, then if carbon capture is fitted to that, if a carbon capture unit is fitted to that, then that can provide low carbon dispatchable power when there aren't enough renewables on the system to meet demand. So it's about having a sensible approach to what is the most pragmatic and efficient way of meeting our electricity demand, and looking at the mix of technologies that need to do that.
Can I come in really quickly on a sort of different angle from this, which is that when you're trying to encourage the take-up of a new technology, you have to get the incentives right for the demand. And there's a really simple example, which is actually the key recommendation and key message that's coming from our progress report today, which is at the moment, electricity is too expensive because policy costs are there's a few reasons why it's too expensive, but one immediate thing that can be done to reduce the cost of electricity is to take off policy costs that are added to electricity much more than to gas, for example. That the incentives are just wrong, the wrong way around. So it becomes more expensive to run a heat pump than a gas boiler when it shouldn't be, based on the physics of the process, because we're adding policy costs in the wrong place. And if we want to scale up, we know what the technology is, we need to give the signalling right and get the incentives right so that the demand's there, which then pulls in demand. That has a sort of knock-on effect for supply, because you've got the demand, which makes things cheaper, so then you get more demand, and they sort of feed into each other. So getting those incentives right, and this is quite a simple example where we could really make a difference.
Can I do one more as well on that? And I think perhaps back to the previous question, but incentives on innovation as well. So we talked about scaling up innovation, and certainly in CCUS, but I imagine it's the same that we talk about the valley of death. So you have new innovations coming along, they get to a certain technology readiness level, and it's very difficult for them to then move above that to deploy at scale, because you've got the large scale products that have got the money behind them that can do that for the first projects. And so, I mean, the government has actually recently put funding behind R&D, significant amounts, and I think this is hopefully going to sort of overcome some of these. But we've got to as well be able to really enable that innovation to come forward and allow, create the right framework for new, and for us it's new capture technologies. That's really going to be where the innovation is. How can we capture the CO2 more efficiently over time, and that's where the cost reduction will come down, and that's where the efficiency will be. So it's about providing the right framework as well to allow that innovation to happen.
Yeah, I think that's quite an important point, is that we've touched on incentives and the government's role in this, but yeah, how more broadly is the current regulatory framework enabling or not enabling the just transition? Does it need to be changed? Is it in a good enough place? Yes, is it slowing this innovation that we need right now? I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that point.
So I'll start with the positive. Actually, we think the UK is doing a lot of things right. Not everything, it's not perfect, but we are doing a lot of things right. So some of those things are, first of all, the CCC embodied here. So having an independent of government kind of body which can provide independent objective advice is really valuable to kind of say this is where you need to be going. That's the first thing that's going right. As we said, our view is the future is electric. I think actually the way we're regulating the electricity sector is broadly going in the right direction. So the regulator, Ofgem, has already been doing things for about the past 5 years to encourage this right balance between building some grid but also using the grid differently. And from our point of view, we're international. We work in Europe, America and Australia. Lots of the countries overseas don't have this combination of a forward-leaning, forward-thinking, independent analysis about the pathways to decarbonise, combined with a regulator that actually helping to drive some of those things and incentivise and influence some of the actors that you need. So in our view, the UK is still one of the best places to be working within the electricity sector in an innovative way. So, yeah, a positive note.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that in particular?
Just wanted to say that regardless of anything's perfect or imperfect, I think consistency is important as well. It's almost a constant in the business plans that we go through with a lot of the companies applying to the program, that there is a risk of changes in the regulatory framework in whichever country they're operating in, and that with the stroke of a pen, the entire service or product can be rendered just dead in the water, and that's it. So I think you need a level of consistency over a period where you can actually get people interested in investing in the first place and putting the effort in for a solution to get it off the ground.
And I can say it for carbon capture and storage, the UK is commonly upheld as a world-leading example in terms of the regulatory framework and having that put into legislation, which means that it's then not subject to political changes, or if it is, it's much harder to change the primary legislation. So, and we've seen changes in the States recently that can be subject to that, which doesn't provide that consistency to the market. But I think, so we've got a great regulatory framework. What's happened in the UK is that the market has then moved a bit quicker than that, and so it's about being able to adapt as necessary to enable the market to move forward at the pace it needs to.
Cool. Okay, well, my final question around these, issues around scale up or integration is about AI. Now, everybody wants to know about AI, and no one really seems to know what they're doing with it. So we mentioned AI a little bit in that first question, and I'm thinking beyond what we've already talked about in terms of the need, either to have those initial jumping in, companies who are going to start this up and things like that. To what extent should we or can we rely on AI and this promise that it has to solve a lot of these problems? Are there technologies now that are already kind of AI technologies that are already speeding up this transition, or is it something that we should be watching but not relying on to help us with the just transition? What do people think with that?
So I'll jump in. So I think as an engineer by background, for me, like, data is paramount, data is king, but it has to be used responsibly. I think AI is a double-edged sword at the moment, in so much as we see, with some of the big tech businesses, we see their carbon footprints growing exponentially as a result of AI. And we're all starting to adopt it, and as that prevalence grows, so emissions will grow. But also there are amazing opportunities of energy efficiency, energy reductions. Talked about battery capacity earlier on. So I think from another sort of example, I suppose, at Vodafone, we're adopting AI, and within our energy consumption, so we've connected 123,000 smart meters across 51,000 sites of Vodafone sites, and in combination with renewable energy, with AI and energy programs, we've managed to reduce our energy per data transferred across our networks by 63% since 2020. Now, that's not all AI, but AI plays a big role in that. We're tracking energy consumption, we're looking at anomalies in there, we're doing statistical modeling in there. I think for me, the risks are, yes, the risks are big, but the opportunity is also amazing. So with AI and data, I think there are three key sort of considerations that are required. One is an understanding of and an awareness of the impact of the increase in data, because it's a very difficult, tangible thing. It's like, you ask a lot of people, what is carbon, and what does that do, and how big is carbon, what's 1 ton of carbon? It's that same sort of proxy, right, of data is you can't kind of touch it and feel it, you can't see it, but the impact is massive. So one is getting an awareness of the understanding of the impact. Two is responsibility. So it's the responsible use of networks, in our case, and of people who are filling the networks with more and more data, more and more traffic, which is growing emissions left, right, and centre. We have to keep pace with that. We have to provide 100% consistent network information traffic, which is then infrastructure and everything else, which is emissions, etc. But then thirdly, I would say 100% leaning into AI, because the opportunities of efficiency, of reductions, of like processing mass data, of, let alone like innovations in the health sector, etc. It's just incredible, but to do so responsibly.
Yeah, that responsible use seems to be the sort of watchword wherever I'm talking to people. It's very much dive in, but you need that kind of responsible education around overuse or kind of frivolous use of it, right? Okay, we will move on then to our next question, which is about the kind of the S in ESG. How do we ensure the deployment of new technologies doesn't reproduce old inequalities we're seeing in the current framework, especially around vulnerable or marginalized communities? I don't know if anyone would particularly like to go first with this. I know we have a few thoughts on it. Sure. Go for it.
I think it's a real enabler for solutions for marginalized communities or more deprived areas. Particularly with space data sets, you have an ability to work in more remote locations. I've just finished a project with a company which is using smart battery and solar technology in East Africa to try and get rid of the reliance on diesel generators. So these are remote communities often which have a reliance on these generators, which diesel prices fluctuate quite a lot with geopolitical activity in general. So they are over-reliant on them, and these are also quite heavily polluting and noise polluting. And so this kind of new tech is enabling infinitely cleaner and also more steady supplies of electricity to these locations. Both steady in terms of the actual supply of the energy, but also the price they're paying for it at the end of the day. And this is only made possible by better technology, SATCOMs, to be able to actually assess what's going on with the tech at any one particular time. They know if it's working or not based on what the sun is doing at that particular time. They have analytics powered by AI, of course, to predict what the solar irradiance is going to be, so what the generation from the panels should be at any particular time and whether it's actually performing correctly. And this is all stuff that wouldn't have been possible without that level of tech.
If I can build on that, because it absolutely kind of overlaps with our world in Vodafone and a lot of work in African countries. So, as I said at the beginning, the purpose of Vodafone is very much connecting people for a better future. So that like the S is core to our raison d'etre. And what's interesting is kind of coupling that, keeping it front of mind with environmental. Actually, there's some really interesting innovations that come out of it. So a big challenge for the world. So there's 2.6 billion people who are not connected. So that's 2.6 billion, mostly in the global south, who don't have access to everything that we take for granted. So financial inclusion, health information and healthcare, like social media, education, like, core fundamentals. A big problem, a big challenge, for example, in South Africa is affordability. So a smartphone, a low-cost smartphone, is about, on average, $62 US dollars. That represents 63% of an average income, monthly income for somebody, let alone the data plans on top of that. So it's untenable, right? So you can't even get online to start with. Vodafone has created a low-cost smartphone at $14, less than, by taking hardware out of it and putting it on the cloud. So it still has basic functionality, enables them to get online, but much more affordable with affordable tariffs. But what's really interesting then is you take that application, and it's part of our core purpose and it's part of our business model, but it enables people to get online. And two examples of where that then drives amazing kind of innovation and progress is we have two programs. One's called M-Pesa. M-Pesa, Pesa is Swahili for money, for cash, and it's a financial enabling platform that ultimately is a low-tech sort of online banking approach, whereby you can transfer credit, cash credit, to somebody for doing work for you via an SMS message. It was launched and then that person who receives it can go to a local pop-up bank in like a shipping container and then retrieve that cash. It was launched in 2007. We've now got over 50 million users. It has over 25 billion transactions annually to the value of 360 billion US dollars annually. And that's come out of an innovation which is part of our business model, but fundamentally it's part of closing that digital divide. And one more is M-Mama, which I find is a lower scale, but I find equally as motivating and inspiring, which is Mama supports pregnant women who are under emergency situations. And it's a digital platform that they can then message that connects via a customer call center to somebody locally, wherever they are in rural areas, and this is Tanzania and Lesotho, who will then drive them to a nearby hospital. There aren't ambulances to support them. Since its deployment, it's supported 142,000 women. In Tanzania, it's reduced pregnant women mortality rate by 18%. In Lesotho, it costs $120,000 a year to run, which is basically the same cost as like a modern ambulance. And it's funded by the local governments. The local governments pay effectively the taxi driver to perform that service for them. So it's driving money into the economy and local employment for the taxi drivers, and fundamentally it's saving lives. So that innovation space, by keeping social front and centre, is just amazing.
Perhaps a different perspective and bringing it back to UK. I think I don't think we have all the answers. I think you're right to raise it. Obviously, we're sitting in quite nearby some of the poorest areas of London, and if we're talking about the transition and electrification, I think the Resolution Foundation came out with a report, I think it was yesterday, talking about when people should be allowed to charge their electric vehicle. And if people have an electric vehicle, do you stop them charging at peak times, etc. And this is all about if you have a household who does have an electric vehicle, who does have a heat pump, that's a good thing, but not everyone's going to be affording that. And actually, those houses are going to be using a lot more electricity than someone who doesn't. So how do you balance those two things? I think it's a problem. And I think thinking about these things in the near term is important. And I think there's a responsibility on some of the companies and some of the advocates to talk about how we're going to make things cheaper for the consumer. If you do manage to bring down electricity costs, then that's going to benefit everyone. Because unless we do some of these things in probably the next 4 years, I think I do have a worry at the next general election, when people feel that they're not involved in this debate and they can't afford things, they're going to vote for political leaders who perhaps don't agree or don't align with the net zero transition, which will make everyone poorer and everyone in a worse place, I think.
Maybe just come on from that, because I think we, in our 7th carbon budget advice that came out in February, we did a distributional analysis in terms of who pays and who benefits from the transition, and we focused on the transition in transport and in heating in people's homes. What we saw when we looked at what people are paying today compared to what they'll be paying in 2050 was a big reduction in bills, because we've got these better, more efficient technologies. But when you look then at the distribution of that, there is some nuance in that. So we had these sort of archetype households that were characterised by whether you were rural or urban, type of property you lived in, income, whether you drive, how many cars you've got, whether you have an off-street parking, flats, homes, this sort of thing. I'll very briefly summarise. And people who drive save. Electric vehicles are just cheaper, and they certainly will be even more cheaper then. For heating, home heating, again, you need some upfront support for heat pumps. There are some properties where actually, most properties can have a heat pump, but there are some where it's harder, in flats, for example, and in some cases we still have other types of electric heating which are less efficient, so electric resistive heating, their bills are a lot higher. And it's often people that are in flats or renting, etc. So this is the sort of thing you have to look out for, and maybe innovation in the space of heat pumps where we can make them work in these different spaces, etc. And keep an eye on that sort of thing where it's really beneficial for people to have these efficient technologies, but there's just a few people that can't.
And lastly, bringing it back to the UK, I think for carbon capture and storage, where it's proposed to be deployed in the UK is in our industrial heartland. So we're thinking Teesside, Northwest, South Wales, these large industrial clusters where the main employment has been the industries and the manufacturing in those areas. They're also located close to the CO2 storage, which is offshore 2 to 3 kilometres under the seabed in empty oil and gas wells or in the suitable geology there. So they happen to be located in these areas where we have seen some deindustrialisation, we've seen job losses, closures, and by fitting carbon capture to these industries, we're giving them a future lease of life. So not only are we decarbonising them, but we're also future-proofing them for the future. We're protecting the jobs that are there so that they can evolve and create low-carbon products. So a cement plant can produce low-carbon cement and sell that low-carbon cement into the future. But also, as you build the infrastructure, the pipelines and the CO2 stores, you attract further new technologies to those areas to take use of that infrastructure. So things like sustainable aviation fuel that we mentioned before. And so it helps to, so it is a natural kind of revitalization of our industries, but also bringing a significant amount of investment into those regions where we have seen quite a lot of deprivation and also job losses over the last few years and closing down of industry. So it does do both. I always say there isn't with carbon capture and storage you don't, but not doing it, you don't have a flat line. You lose all those jobs and industries. And by making sure that we are implementing carbon capture and storage in the UK, we not only protect those jobs, but we also bring further investment.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left now or so. So I think before we open it up to any questions that people have, I will just go down the line and I will ask you one last main question. This is obviously about innovation. So we'll talk about kind of thinking toward the future. Where do you see, or how do you see the field having changed in 5 years' time? What technologies do you see having come to the forefront and having scaled up, things like that? And yes, how do you see this transition having kind of prolonged?
I'll be very brief. So we have taken the first financial investment decisions for carbon capture and storage in the UK in the last 6 months. And so in 5 years' time, we will actually be capturing and storing storing CO2 in the UK. And that will be the real start of deploying this industry at scale.
I think for me, it's about us as individuals choosing to do different things. So choosing to buy an energy as a package, as a subscription package, a bit like how we get in a mobile phone. When you subscribe to a mobile phone, you're going to do the same thing with a heat pump or electric vehicle or anything else, and then allow someone else to partly control your heat pump or your electric vehicle.
Okay, I'm gonna give a sneak preview of some of the stats from our report that Emma's going to be, our CEO is going to be talking about in her keynote soon, because I think this sort of brings out where I think we are really making progress. We actually saw quite a lot of progress in the data, greenhouse gas emissions falling, but also looking at the rollout of clean technology. So last year, 1/5 of new electric vehicles sold were new cars sold were electric. 1.5 million electric cars on the UK roads now. So that's really starting to happen. By 2030, new sales of petrol and diesel cars will be phased out. So it will have happened, right? Heat pumps sales were up, installations were up 56% last year. That's a big increase. That was supported by, in part by government support, government grants, but it's still only 1% of homes in the UK heated by heat pumps, very much behind. So I'd say by the end of the decade, we still will be in that transitioning phase, and we really need clear signalling from government to keep that going, and key point, make electricity cheaper. Wind and solar installation rates were the highest they've been in 6 years last year. So, and we know that government has a plan to have clean power by 2030. So by that point, they will be the lion's share. I mean, there was already a big share of generation, but lion's share of generation, of course, with support from things like gas with carbon capture and storage, where, as Olivia has said, we've seen financial close on a project for that already. So I'd say in 5 years' time, quite a lot of things will have moved forward, but we will still, and coming at scale, we will still have optionality in things that we're developing in sustainable aviation fuel, etc. But I think we'll be quite far on the transition already.
I think building on what we already have in terms of small bespoke satellites for interesting niche uses. So things like methane detection or anomalous heat detection using infrared. I think we'll see a lot more of those for interesting uses for the energy industry.
Fantastic, and Tom.
I agree. I'd say low orbit satellites. Vodafone started in that journey, but the opportunity is amazing for like climate, like emergency resilience. You know, satellites aren't subject to flood, aren't subject to hurricanes, so resilience there is really good. But also like prevention, in so much as, for example, detecting forest fires before they really take hold. And nature mapping, and Rowan talked about that a little bit previously in biodiversity understanding. So I say that's one thing. The other is the whole kind of sensor ecosystem. So sensors, digitization, and AI in combination, and sort of feedback sort of systems there. I think they're already growing, but we're going to be leaps ahead in 5 years' time with the opportunities there.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll hand it over to you guys now. If you'd like to raise your hand, if you have a question for our panel, there is a roving mic, I believe, that is coming around somewhere. We have one down here at the front. It's coming over.
Hello. My question, I think, is for Tom. So I was really interested in the social innovation you mentioned in South Africa, and it really brought the community spirit to it and innovations to include more and more people who are underserved. It kind of leads into the next panel talking about community energy, but I just wondered if you had any thoughts as to what role could communication, I guess, play in the rollout of smart tech and clean tech to vulnerable households who potentially aren't connected to the grid. But obviously it's an adjacent thing, but you've done something amazing there. Is there something that we could be doing in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, still in UK, there are a lot of areas of UK that, as you say, aren't connected. So in rural areas. So actually enabling connectivity fundamentally then provides the platform for clean tech, for education, for health services, for sort of everything in between from a social and an environmental perspective. So yeah, I think there's still quite a kind of shocking proportion. It's both, but I would say it's twofold. One is hardware and software. It's having the hardware capability, the connectivity, but it's also affordability. So actually what's really vital from a social perspective is the enablement of affordable tariffs and affordability to get online to then be able to have those access. So you can't have one without the other.
Does anyone have anything further to say about that, or no? Okay, any further questions for our panel? There's a couple around.
Hi there. You spoke a bit about, sort of in a lot of the sectors anyway, a lot of the innovation and the technology already being there, but there being this viability gap to investment and large-scale adoption. Olivia, you spoke a bit about the sort of investors and corporate partners just need to take a bit of a chance on it. From the point of view of startups and sort of that sort of area, what do you see as some non-technical capability that needs to be developed in order for that viability gap to be closed and overcome it?
To come back on that. I think it's about creating the framework to enable them to move to the next stages. So we're very good in the UK about investing in the initial innovation, and our universities are great, and we've come out in carbon capture. There's been a few capture technologies developed in the UK, but we need to then create the framework for them to be able to pilot at scale and have the opportunity to do that and develop and learn from that and move on. And so I think what can I used to work at Ofgem, and we would run competitions, and it was always about providing the best value product. And so for new innovative technologies to compete on the same level and to be able to have the same sort of proven technology to drive their costs down is very challenging. So you've got to create those regulatory spaces, sandboxes, or whatever they are, to enable them to compete and to be able to trial out their technology at increasingly sort of larger scales. So it's not just very small scale. They can build up and test them and pilot them at larger scales to enable them to move up that from technology readiness levels of 6, 7 up to 8, 9, and then they can start sort of competing on a wider scale. And so it's somehow removing that sort of value for money. It's not value for money, but we've got to be able to provide the platform to enable them to move through that without continually looking for sort of lowest cost and whether they can actually compete at that level. So it's safe regulatory spaces, I think, to be able to deploy.
Fantastic. I think we may have time for one more very quick question before we finish. So the gentleman over there. It's a very desperate question.
Thank you very much. The question for Olivia again, I'm sorry. UK government policy seems to be based for carbon capture is to generate electricity for a few years at new power stations, gas-fired power stations, which ultimately may run on liquefied natural gas. So the carbon emissions for that may actually arise primarily outside the country, maybe in Texas. So is it worthwhile developing this? And a rider. The House of Lords debate on Monday has almost certainly confirmed that government is no longer interested in expecting the Drax power station to be having carbon capture on it, and that would make a big hole in the UK government's BECCS policy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so first of all, the government policy on carbon capture is to decarbonise industries. So power is one part of that. So it's industrial decarbonisation, low carbon hydrogen, power, greenhouse gas removals. So it is one of the parts of it. It is true that the first financial investment decision on the first gas power station is for a new one, but it won't be. There can also be retrofit as well. It's not a government policy that has got to be the way to go. But in terms of meeting Clean Power 2030 targets, it's quite a challenging target, and so they've got to look at all options in terms of how we can get there. The overall looking at the challenges in terms of how we meet net zero within each of those parts of the value chain or each of those parts of the sectors is individual to each of those, and there've been studies and there has been evidence to say that of course we are going to meet net zero through each of them, and they will have to prove that. So obviously carbon capture on a new power station is going to still have to have those very high levels of capture and meet those high levels of so I think over 80-95% capture of CO2 to ensure that they reach the required levels. For BECCS and Drax, BECCS, and perhaps Emily will talk about this as well. I mean, the bioenergy and carbon capture is a key part of us being able to get to net zero. Drax is obviously a huge part of that in the UK. And I wouldn't comment on the individual project. I think beyond that, other than it is something that we would want to see move forward.
I mean, I can just quickly follow up on that, which is also BECCS is in our pathways included both for the removals that it gets from carbon dioxide so to have negative emissions, and also in the power sector to provide power generation. If we don't have Drax, it could be another BECCS plant, or it could be that you replace it with something else in the electricity supply system, but then you would need removals elsewhere in the system. So it's a balance that you need there.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to our panel, Olivia Powers, Matthew Wilson, Dr. Emily Nurse, Rowan Edwards and Tom Crawford. And thank you all for attending. Thank you.